All right, so on to the next section, talks about oligopolies. Again, remember how the world looks, right? Over here is our perfect competition. Over here is our monopoly. Remember that the monopolistic competition is over here close to a perfect competition. The oligopoly, on the other hand, moves to the right. A little bit more conservative, a little bit more like a monopoly. Cool thing about oligopolies, folks, well, I'm not going to draw any graphs. Yay. I know, you're disappointed.
I mean, boo.
All right, so the key, still start the same way, though. What are our three characteristics of an oligopoly? Well, we sellers, right? A few sellers, basically it means more than one. How high could it go? Well, it kind of depends on the industry to some stage, right? It could be as little as 2 or 3. It could be as high as 6 or 7. Once you get up to a dozen or so, then it starts to look more like this, right? Once you get a dozen people running different companies, they're going to compete.
Example of types of oligopolies.
Classic examples, the big 4 car makers, right? So the big 4 U.S. companies that make cars, they are practicing an oligopoly, all right? In theory, they're competing against each other, right? Yeah. In theory. So what are their prices? They're wildly different, right?
No.
Why not? Why don't they have a whole big huge price difference? Why isn't, Chrysler trying to outsell, Ford by lowering its prices a whole ton? Why not?
Costs money to make a car.
Costs money to make a car. And if you lower your price, what happens to your profit?
It goes down.
So if you can avoid lowering your price as a seller, you do so. Right? Okay? So, all right, we'll get deeper into that here in a minute. So, are we making differentiated products? Is there a difference between a Chrysler and a Ford?
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of, yeah. It's so product may or may not differentiate. Depends on the type of oligopoly. So we'll talk a little bit more about this as we get deeper into it, right? And then last but not least, how easy is it to get in and out? It's pretty tough. It's not impossible like a monopoly, but it's still pretty tough. I mean, can you start your own new car company? Well, yeah, I mean, you could, right? I mean, yeah, if you got enough money and you got enough guts, you could do it, right? Sure would be nice if someone did, right?
You first.
All we needed is somebody with a few $1 billion and we could do it. All right, so the question then is, what do these 3 things lead us to? Do we get to set the price? Do you think the market is setting the price on these Fords and Chryslers and whatnot? There's some set the price, sort of, and we'll get to when that doesn't necessarily happen. All right? So, are they going to profit maximize at marginal revenue equals marginal cost?
Yes.
Oh yeah, that never changes, folks. This is true always. Doesn't matter who you do. Even though we're not going to draw any graphs, these companies still do this, okay? They're still looking at marginal revenue and comparing it to marginal cost. That's what you do as a business that produces large numbers of a product. You're looking at how much is it costing you to make it, how much am I selling it for? And as long as the revenue is above the cost.
Any business, really?
Oh yeah, period. Any. Doesn't matter. It's just a little bit easier to do it when you've only got 10 employees as opposed to 20,000, right? Do you think they make long-run profit?
Well, we always need cars.
True, but if they all started competing, right? If there were all of a sudden a dozen of them instead of 5, I mean, Like if there was real competition in the car market, they'd be like this, right? But so, I mean, they're competing, right? You guys see ads, right? I mean, so they're competing, right? They're trying to. It's just that their competition doesn't tend to drop the price much, does it? All right, so. Maybe.
Is that a for sure thing? Or would you rather lean on the no side?
Probably not. Anytime you have competition, you really aren't going to make profit in the long run. Again, think long run is it's fairyland, right? I mean, in the long run, we would expect if there was profit being made in the car industry that more car companies would enter the market, right? I mean, yeah, it might take a long time, but the long run is way past a long time, right? I mean, this is, infinite number of years into the future. Do you think there'll be another car company? Yeah, there probably will, all right? And maybe they'll all actually compete. So how efficient are we? And really this is often a direct relationship to how much competition you have, right? So here we were sort of efficient, but we got killed because we were still advertising. Yeah, not really. Not really efficient. And again, it's really strictly because the no competition thing, right? Or more along the lines of not enough. All right. So you may ask then, okay, what drives these oligopoly markets? What drives the car industry? Very rarely do the buyers have anything to do with anything. We basically get screwed, period, as a buyer, always. That's the way it works, right? The only time we don't get screwed is when it's a perfect competition, right? That's even here in these monopolistic competitions. The price is really too high because all of these companies are wasting so much money trying to tell us that they're different. If they would just shut the hell up and make their product, we could decide which one was better ourselves, and it would be cheaper, right?
We're not able to make those decisions.
That's true. They need to tell us, just in case. All right, so how do oligopolies compete? So that's our question. So it's a question mark. And our first thought is with prices. And the fact is, no, they just don't, right? And the reason why is that if there's 4 or 5 companies making a product, one of them could try and lower the price to try and steal market share from one of the other competitors. But what will the competitors do as soon as they see that they have lowered the price? Do the same thing. And if all 4 or 5 or 6 of them lower their prices, will they have gained anything? In fact, what will they have done? Probably lost, right? Because they will have had to increase production. They will have left their marginal revenue equals marginal cost comfort, and they will have started to piss away part of their profit. Not a good idea. So generally speaking, what happens is that the oligopolists kind of watch each other, and they say, okay, if they do lower their prices, we will. And if they start lowering prices, everybody lowers their prices with them. And that's what leads to the companies basically saying, don't bother. All right? So the question then is, or why, or how do we dictate this? Well, this is the mutual interdependence.
Is that why, like, all companies, car companies, or all mattress companies decide that President's Day is a great day to have sale?
No, basically, yeah. Uh-huh.
And it's not like just one of them, it's everyone.
Yeah, no, if any one of them has a sale on any one given day, they will all have a sale on the same day, period. That's the way it works. And it's not like they're hiding from each other, right? I mean, they know, and it's standard practice. And yeah, you may try and, as a car company, right, you may think that Chrysler's going to lower their minivan prices and Ford's going to lower their SUV prices, and that therefore they're competing against each other. But more than likely, they're doing this, mutual interdependence. Mutual interdependence means that you know what the other guy is doing always. There's no way to hide it, right? And you can react just as fast as they do. So if you're going to change your prices, they're going to change theirs just as fast. There's no way you can ever undercut somebody and steal business, right? So this is basically everyone knows everyone else. So lowering prices, there's an R in lowering, I swear. Lowering prices to steal market share almost never happens. Because if one of them lowers it, they all lower it, and all they've done is all lowered their profit, which would be silly. Since they know that the other company is going to lower their prices, you're not going to make any more money by selling more cars. All you're doing is earning less per car. And that would just mean that you're helping the consumers, who you don't give two rat nickels about. All right? All you care about is profit. All right? So how do they compete then? The way they compete is through non-price competition, which is even better, theoretically.
For them or, oh, not for us.
Yeah, nothing's good for us, period, right? All right, so what does it mean to compete without competing in price? Well, one of the ways you do it is by research and development claims, or R&D claims. Right? And you won't even say research and development, you'll say the phrase R&D. It's like Chrysler has been doing R&D on its, Roadster, and it's now way, way, way better than the Ford or the, Toyota or anybody that you're competing against because we said it was better. It's got, a Hemi in it, and that Hemi is better than the other guy's Hemi G, which is, not as good as ours, right? So ours has 400 horses in its engine. This guy's only has 395 horses in his engine, right? Because those horses make a huge difference. Because you got to feed them, and you got to clean up after them, and right?
Or they use those nice words like independent study. It wasn't us that did it. We paid them.
We paid someone to do an independent study.
So we look good. And our car came out on top.
God, funny how that worked, right? And it's done in insurance, right? I mean, what are the insurance companies? How are they trying to tell you that they're better? Well, we can bundle all our insurance together, and it'll be better. Or basically, we'll get all of your business, so it's better, right? And we'll give you a discount if you have only 2 accidents per year instead of 3. Okay. Can you prove it? Well, only if you read the small print. How many of you have ever read the small print in your insurance claim? Yeah, I never have. Okay. Verizon and AT&T. Red map versus blue map. Which one's better? The blue one's better. Why? Because it's blue. Amen. Because their phones are going to be more responsive to the network that's available to all of them. And does that mean anything to you? But they're better because they told us they were better. All right, so R&D claims, or we sometimes product differentiate. So we try to say that my car is better than their car, but we don't try and necessarily say that it's better because it's different. We just try to say it's better because we as a company are better. Right? You like us as a company more, and that's why our cars are better. Right? We're greener, we're cleaner, we're going to hire more Americans than the other guy is. Right? I mean, regardless of whether it's true or not, right? Because that's hard to test or to claim. All right? So non-price competition tends to be the biggest way that oligopolists compete. And again, nowhere ever when you see commercials about these guys will you see price. Almost never. They're never going to tell you that the Ford is less than the any other car in price. It's just going to say it's a better car. They're bargain. It's a better dollar per, pick your favorite word.
Miles per gallon.
Right, exactly. They may try and throw that one at you. And it's like, ooh, our worst car gets 20 miles to the gallon at least. It's like, wait, huh? Why is that important? Right? I mean, don't ask me, okay? All right, so how else? Well, there are other types of oligopolies that exist where there's one clear king of the oligopoly market. And the clear king leads all of its buddies, all right? So most of the oligopolies that we know tend to work off of this non-price competition because these are the ones that advertise heavily to try and tell you that their product is better than the other ones, all right? So those are the ones that you will know most. So when you see advertising where the price is not a part of the advertisement, almost always an oligopoly, almost always, okay? Not always, but pretty darn close. If you talk about price and you only have a small number of people in the market, like a Walmart, right? A Walmart is a price leader. Walmart has said, look, we have minimized our cost better than everybody else. And what that means is that we get to set what the profit margin is for all of the items. Because everybody knows that Walmart, in theory, has the lowest prices, and generally they do. But what happens is that as soon as Walmart lowers its price of, water bottles to $5.99, what does Kmart and Target and all the other ones have to do? They lower theirs to $5.99 too. So Walmart will only make like $3 or $4 off of their water bottle. Target, Kmart, those guys, they'll only make $1 or $2. They'll still make a profit, but not the same level as Walmart because they lead the way. All right? So in a price leadership situation, one company is king and sets the price for everyone else. And again, think about this as being more along the lines of setting the level of profit you're going to accept. If you have minimized your costs, you will still get the most profit if everybody charges the same price. And everybody knows that, okay, that's the way it's going to work. All right? Now, sorry.
Who decides among that group who is king? Does somebody they put themselves forward as this is how it is?
Oh, yeah, that's exactly how they do it, right? When a company in an oligopoly, a small number, a few number of companies starts advertising price, that's them trying to step up and say, I am the price leader, you must do what I say. And when any other company tries to stop that, so think JCPenney, right? JCPenney did what for about the last 2 or 3 years? They tried to say, look, we refuse to accept that Walmart is the price leader. We're going to set up our own pricing scheme that's different, and we're going to try and work that way and try and say that we're the company that can handle it, right? What happened to JCPenney's profits? Went down the tank, right? JCPenney's been in the crapper for like 2 years. Finally, what has JCPenney done in the last 6-8 months?
Hired Ellen?
They buckled. They've said, okay, we'll quit bothering to try and tell you guys that we're a better company. Instead of trying to do non-price competition, right? They tried the whole, use social media to tell everybody that JCPenney is better, right? JCP, that became the big thing, right? Changed their name to JCP because then you can say JCP in a 127 character. That's really powerful in the social media world. And so they were trying to get groundswell by telling people, tweet about JCP. Come on, JCP is awesome. It's amazing. JCP this, JCP that. And you see it everywhere. Right? Did anybody really figure out what JCP stood for? No. Unfortunately for them, no. So what happened? All of this non-price competition, all the money that they were funneling in there didn't do them any good on their sales. And anywhere where their prices were higher than Walmart, nobody bought it.
Well, see, what they should have done is, which is what they are, is they should have marketed themselves to a different market.
They were trying. That's what they were trying to do.
They're not the same market as Walmart.
Yeah.
Clothing line and everything else, they're not. So why even advertise as if you're battling with them?
It's because their crap lasts longer than 6 months.
Well, what they were trying to do was to enter into the market of the 20 to 40-year-old people, right? That's the social media people, right? And that the way they were going to do it, instead of doing it by competing price-wise and accepting whatever Walmart stated as their profit margin, they said, look, we can have a higher price than Walmart. And as long as we tell people through Twitter and Facebook and whatever other social medias are out there, that's why we're better. You should pay an extra 5 to 10% per item, and it just didn't work.
Yeah.
They tried, right? They actually tried. It just, unfortunately, it failed, right?
You don't compete with the king.
That's right. If the king is out there and he's got the best cost level set up, and his scheme is to set up the profit margins that you have to accept, well, then that's the way it works.
Wasn't it Kmart before Walmart? As far as Price King goes?
Kind of. That was a debatable thing. Kmart was actually very similar to the Target price market as well.
Okay.
So what they did was they came up with the non-price control.
Right.
But what they did there was that they found cheap products that tried to pull you in order to get you in the store to buy. And then they tried to have in-store marketing that would make you buy more than just what the cheap stuff was.
Right.
It's another portion of this non-price competition stuff where it's suck you in, make you buy more. It's
The
the
way they
grocery,
put milk in the back of the store?
right? Grocery store plans, right?
Well,
Mhm.
if you ever went to Kmart back in the day and you see the blue light special, it moved around the store.
Oh yeah, of course it did.
They went to an area of the store that they wanted to market heavily.
Of course it did. Yeah.
You walk way over here, because it's never the same place all the time.
Of course not.
Way over here, there's something over here that we want you to see.
Oh yeah. Sweaters. Sweater vests were a big thing for a little while. It was great.
Yeah.
Got myself a good, made in Egypt flannel one year for that, $2.99 or something like that. Yeah, it lasted less than 6 months, but whatever. All right, now the most fun method that oligopolies now realize that a lot of this stuff, this dealing with number 2, these non-price competitions, either of these two, even number 3 is a little questionable, but part of this is very, very, very scarily on the edge of breaking the law here in this country. There is a no colluding law, antitrust laws that state if more than one company gets together and tries to collude and decide what the prices are going to be, that the U.S. government has to step in and stop them from doing it and tell them, look, you are forcing the prices to be too high so that you guarantee yourself profit. That's supposed to be against the law, right? All of these methodologies, right, are scary in that really Verizon and AT&T, they're never really lowering their price. All they're trying to tell you is that my map is different. Or they're trying to tell you that my service is better, or that my, apps that come with my phone is better. Are they competing with their price? Do the prices ever go down or compete against? No. So why isn't the U.S. government coming in and saying, compete more on price? Very true. But that's a question that's tough to answer, right? Because in theory, they are competing, right? They'll say, well, look, they're advertising, we're advertising, that's competition, right? The competition is just different level than price. And what oligopolies really came out, as a market structure is because of those laws that the government came up with, right? So these companies have to compete in some fashion in order to guarantee that the government doesn't step in and say your prices are skewed. So if they're not wasting money advertising, the government would step in and say you need to lower your prices, period. So they actually have to do it. It's stupid, but at the same time brilliant, right?
Do you have an example of an industry that's happened to where they actually did step in?
Well, yeah, phone industry.
The phone industry?
Right, when they busted up AT&T, right, that because they had gotten so big and that the competitors they had all become small enough that you didn't see advertisements for AT&T in that 1995 to 2001 era. Why? Because they didn't need to. They were essentially the king. There were competitors in all of the small local markets, but overall in the nation they weren't. They had no competition. And since they weren't wasting money showing how they were better than the local companies, the government stepped in and said, we have to break you up. And now that there's two out there that are constantly advertising against each other, and they don't collude, they don't get together and talk about price, ever.
Maybe they don't.
Legally, they don't. Right? I mean, there's no way that we can prove that they do. So that's why it continues to exist the way it is.
A lot of business lunches in America.
Well, I wouldn't know anything about it. I'm just pointing out that that's part of what we need in these market structures to guarantee that we don't become quote-unquote monopolies, which would then have to be run by the government, which is, bad for the profit margin of the company, right?
But, one part of that is that, like you said, they know each other.
Yeah.
They know each other. So
It's hard, right?
We're doing it, but we're not doing it openly.
Right.
But we watch each other enough where we...
Yeah, it's, yeah. But you're still competing, right? Because you're spending R&D dollars to say I'm better than they are. And that's what's key, apparently. Because the government hasn't gone back in and started to do anything about it. Right, or break the two of them up or whatever, right? I mean, that's part of why the government wanted to step in and save the car industry, right? The reason they'll tell you that they did that was to make sure that Americans kept their jobs, right? Well, they could have also argued that it's also to keep competition in the car market, right? I mean, if 2 or 3 of them went under and there was only one left, what happens? Yeah, would you like the government to run your car industries? No, it's much better if they step in and run them for like 6 months instead of running them for 60 years, right? I mean,
it's even better when they bail you out.
well, we'll get to that in the macro side of things, but that's fun stuff too. All right, so the last type of oligopoly that we run into is expressly against the law in the United States is a cartel. And what a cartel is, when oligopolists collude and agree to cut output to make price and profit rise. Competing members of a particular market specifically coming together and say, okay, look, we're competing. This is stupid. Why are we bothering? We should all be cutting our output by 25%. And if we cut our output by 25% and the price increases by 40 to 45%, our profits will go up 20 to 30%. Our revenue will go up 20 to 30%. And since we cut our output, our costs will also fall. If revenue is rising and costs are falling, what do you do as a company? You skip all the way to the bank. And you have to skip that way like you're riding a horse, but not really. Only on Thursdays. Okay, so a cartel is probably the scariest form of a monopoly, and the thing about them is they never last, right? You may think that the reason they never last is because the U.S. government steps in and stops them, right? Because it's against the law in the United States. Well, there aren't any cartels in the United States. Where might there be some cartels? Cuba. Mexico, right? What's the #1 cartels that exist right now in the drug cartels in Mexico, right? I mean, they are literally cartels. What's going on in Mexico is that there's about 4 or 5 different large drug companies, I'll call them that, but you know what I mean. And they're trying to restrict the supply that's coming into the different areas that they sell to make sure that prices stay higher. And when somebody goes along and starts overproducing, what do those cartels do? They have an accident. And then they get absorbed back into the cartel and they go back to restricting prices, restricting supply, and keeping prices higher, right? This has been done in lots of different examples, right? So one of the best ones right now are the drug cartels in Mexico. They're the cool thing about it, and there's not a whole lot cool about it, but is that from an economics perspective, it's awesome, right? Because you can actually, they will actually hire economists to come in and make sure that their output is maximizing profit. The number of ways that people have found out, the biggest way that the nations in the world have figured out about the drug cartels is the fact that they switch economists on a regular basis. And what do the economists who get released by the drug company do? They call states evidence because they don't want to get killed, they want to get hidden. And the U.S. government, or heck, anybody in the world would say, yes, we will hide you as long as you tell us everything you know. And what they tell them is, look, here's how they profit maximize. And it's just like everybody thought it was economically. It's cool. I mean, in a not so good way. Right? In a mathematician's way. Very true. Again, I mean, it's the same thing that any other monopoly is doing out there right now. It's just that it's being spread out over 4 or 5 different drug cartels. All right? Yeah, that's the example for right now. The most classic example that ever existed for this, though, and really the first major one, was OPEC. Right, the oil-producing nations of the Middle East. When the Middle Eastern countries all got together and decided, okay, look, we're all going to cut supply by 25%, and they all did it. So they were probably about somewhere between 8 to 10. I can't remember how many there were exactly, but all 8 to 10 Middle East countries cut supply by 25%. So back in the early 70s, mid 70s, when I was driving, well, I guess I wasn't driving yet, but it was my older brother. He was driving a 1977 Chevelle station wagon, 8-barrel, nice, purred like a. Oh, that thing was sweetness on the road. Granted, I had license plates down on the floorboards to make sure that the rust didn't, well, you got to do what you got to do. But, anyways, around that thing, and gas prices were what, about 89 cents a gallon, and mid-70s, what happened? All of a sudden, OPEC did this. Prices doubled. $1.79 a gallon. Can you imagine paying $1.79 a gallon for gas? I can remember it, too. I remember waiting in line with my parents and with my older brother. He used to take us out to golfing, golf courses, to play all the different golf courses in Northwest Indiana. It was great until all of a sudden gas shot up to $1.79 a gallon. And he's like, I can't afford that. Well, yeah, Anyways, so so what ended up happening was that all of these countries got together and they cut their prices or cut their output and their money. Yeah, I mean, oh my goodness, because at this stage they had us hooked, right? We couldn't exist without oil, and there was no other place that had oil. So, a barrel of oil cost, all of like $60 a barrel, which it used to cost like 32, 33. And that's the number one ingredient you use to make gas. Right? So gas prices doubled. Now, this lasted about 4 years. Why did it last longer?
It wasn't under government control.
It wasn't under government control, so why did it stop? I mean, the U.S. government couldn't do anything. I mean, lots of people think, well, the U.S. government stopped it, right? I mean, we went in and told them, you can't do this anymore? So part of what started happening is that other companies started looking for oil elsewhere. I mean, all of the big 6, oil companies, Conoco, Shell, Mobil, BP, Exxon, they all started like, holy crap, we need to figure out where else to get oil instead of buying it from Middle East. But how fast can you build a oil rig and well and start pumping oil out of it? Takes about minimum 5 years. That's if you're lucky, usually 10. So it started the process for us looking for more oil, but we obviously couldn't, right? But this ended in 4 years. Why?
So like that 70s show where they had that big station wagon and then they got the little car?
Part of it was that, but this was the first time where we actually started to put emissions controls on cars and tried to have standards for gas mileage on our cars a little bit, but that didn't make enough of a difference. So why did this end?
Did we stop buying as much?
No, we still bought just as much as we did before. We tried, but it didn't really work. Absolutely, war. What war happened to end the OPEC oil embargoes? Oh, no, that was in the 90s, right? Desert Storm was in the 90s.
7-Day War?
Oh, you're on the right track. But it had nothing to do with any of the bigs. All it had to do was with the Iran-Iraq war. So the Sunnis and the Shiites had their first, one of their, every 20 years wars, right? Holy war. Yeah, it was a sect war. And what do you need to go to war? Yeah, and what do you have to do to get those? You need money. So what did Iraq do in 1978 in order to make more money? Well, increased production, right? Remember, everybody has their supply cut by 25%. What does Iraq do? Instead of cutting its supply by 25%, jacked it way up, raised it 10% above where it used to be. And they made a killing. For 6 months, Iraq just raped the entire Middle Eastern countries for more money than they were worth. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending how you look at it, once all the other countries started to see the price of oil dropping, right? So a barrel of oil, which was up at $60 a barrel, all of a sudden dropped down to like $52, $51 a barrel. Saudi Arabia is looking at going, wait a second, why is the price of oil dropping? We're all cutting our supply by 25%. Not everybody. So as soon as Saudi Arabia saw that Iraq had doubled their output, what did Saudi Arabia do?
Doubled their output.
And what did Egypt do? And what did Iran do? And what did Syria do? And what did everybody did it, right? And what ended up happening was that the cartel that was fairly well organized and was working like a monopoly, all of a sudden, not only did it not go back to being an oligopoly, where they kind of both all agreed that we weren't going to keep prices too low, they all started overproducing, so much so that oil literally went back down and was cheaper than what it was back in the early 70s. I mean, the price of gas literally fell back to 89 cents a gallon for 2 or 3 years back in the late 70s, early 80s. It was awesome. Talk about going golfing whenever we wanted. Man, we would drive up to Michigan. It was awesome. I mean, I didn't know anything about it, but but it was awesome, right? So the thing that happens that breaks up a cartel is that, yeah, cheaters will always kill it eventually. The key to the cartel dying is that it needs to be run by humans, because as humans, eventually we get greedy. The prophet was nice, but we always want more. Or we have to go to war, and so we have to have more to buy better trucks and better cars and better Kalashnikovs from Russia. I mean, that was the reason why they had to go to overproduce, is that the Russians raised the price of guns. We wouldn't sell them any, but the Russians didn't have a problem. Nah, we actually we were trying to stop Iraq. We were funding Iran at the time. Yeah.
Now, you know that if the price is right, we will sell it to competitors.
That's true. that is true. But at that stage, the Russians were more into the Iraq side than we were. Yeah. I mean, it was actually the fact that they were on which sea is that? The sea on the northwest that borders. Yeah, it's one of those Caspians, or the one that's next to Bulgaria. What's the further north, up in Europe itself? Shoot, I can't remember. Getting old.
Well, in 79, 80, we had the Iran-Contra conflict in that affair in the early 80s.
Yeah,
So they weren't our greatest friends, but...
Right, but pre-80s, we were funding all of their war in Iran. I mean, we were funding their government. We were keeping it propped up. I mean, it was until the 80s when everybody figured out that's what we were doing. They were like, wait a second, shame on you. And we were like, what? Huh? No, that wasn't us. No, George Bush had nothing to do with it. Neither did,
Neither did Reagan.
Yeah, right, exactly. But yeah, whatever. Politics, not part of the class. But the key is realizing that eventually the cartels die because someone cheats. And once someone cheats, everybody goes and overproduces. And literally, they lose even their oligopoly advantage and switch back to something that's more like a monopolistic competition, potentially even a perfect competition, because they're just They're all like, oh, we have to produce and produce and produce and produce so that we can, expect to make. All right, so, yeah. Those are our 4 types of oligopolies that we can run into. Well, really the major 3, right? The non-price competition, the price leadership type, and the cartel type. And remember that it's all driven by this mutual interdependence. Eventually we figure out what everybody else is doing, and that's why we're not going to actually really compete with price. All right, let me make sure I'm not skipping anything. All right, that is the end of Chapter 9. Now, there is more in Chapter 9, but I'm going to skip it if you don't mind too terribly much. There is a section on game theory. Please read it at your leisure, but realize that I will not ask you any questions about it. All right? It is relatively interesting stuff. It talks about how if there's really only 2 competitors in a particular market, oftentimes prices are lower than you would expect because they don't want to get screwed by the other competitor. Right? This is about airline ticket prices. Right? It's cool if you look at it, but I'm not going to ask you any questions on it, so don't sweat it. All right. So, we okay with Chapter 9? How about a comparison of the 4 market structures? So as consumers, what's the number one thing that we care about? Price. So price-wise, how would you rank the different markets? Who sells the cheapest type of product, or whose market is going to produce and have the cheapest price on the market? All right, so perfect competition is always cheapest. Why? They're price takers, right? And since they're price takers, they know that advertising and wasting money on anything else other than lowering cost is worthless, right? Who comes next? Monopolistic competition. They're not cheapest, but they're cheaper. Why are they more expensive than a perfect competition? They product differentiate, right? They waste money telling you that their product is better than the other one. Who's next? Oligopoly. Now, oligopoly is one of those ones in there where you may say that an oligopoly kind of floats in and around, and that's really true, because if you have a cartel that breaks up, the subsequent oligopoly that's formed afterwards often will have prices that are closer to being a perfect competition. All right? Usually the oligopoly is somewhere between monopolistic competition and monopoly. And you might consider them to be a cheap seller of goods, but they really are not. All right, and then obviously, then the worst one is the highest price. So, based on this setting, which one do buyers prefer? Perfect competition. Which one do sellers prefer? All right. Why would a seller not like a monopoly, though? It's hard to get in. It's hard to get out, but what else? Think about the U.S. and the law.
Control, regulation.
Regulation, right? So you may say that a seller would love to have a monopoly, and you'd be right as long as you said that monopolists can cut production to have the highest price possible, but usually they don't get to in this country because our laws dictate that they don't. So you could argue, if you were asked this question, to say that oligopolies are better because there at least you're not being controlled by the government and your prices are still relatively high. Again, neither answer is wrong as long as you explain it correctly. All right? Just pointing out that, this is a social science, so very rarely are you ever wrong unless you don't explain yourself well. All right, so if we care about price, this is economics. What's the other side of price? Quantity. Right? Everything's driven by price and quantity, right? So, who produces the most? Who's next in the list in order? Monopolistic competition. And similar down the line, right? So please note that this is actually relatively consistent along the line, right? These guys are the cheapest and produce the most. And it starts to just work the same direction, right? A nice little mathematical flow model. As long as you remember the order that these things come in the world, you will remember the order that their prices are going to wind up and that their quantities are going to wind up, as long as you keep your head screwed on straight. And I could also ask you about efficiency, and the efficiency argument goes exactly the same way, right? These guys are the most efficient, these guys are the next efficient, these guys are the next efficient, these guys are probably the least efficient. All right? All right, so I want you to be able to talk about any one of the models, but I also want you to be able to compare them back and forth, okay? All right, so that's Chapter 9. Before I forget, what? But there's an odd one up there. Anytime I put an odd one up there, I'm being nice. There you go. Well said. You are welcome.
Yes, yes, you will.
Well, if we get through Chapter 10, yes. All right, so Chapter 10, we're only going to cover about half of Chapter 10, but I do want to, at least get ourselves started on that. I don't think I'll get through it today, so there won't be additional homework on top of this Chapter 9 stuff.
Aw, that's too bad.
Nicely said.
I've got a question.
Yes, sir.
You told me about a week or so ago that you're going to put some additional stuff on the YouTube that will lend to better understanding midterm.
Yes, there will be a study guide and a practice set of questions put on Blackboard in the next day or two.
In its completeness, it will give us anything that we might need to know for the midterm?
It will let you know all of the things that you had better know for the midterm. Yes.
Okay.
So a lot of it is it's just sort of an outline saying these are the key topics from Chapter 1 you better know. These are the key topics from Chapter 2 you better know, etc. down the line.
Okay.
There will be a set of practice test questions, practice quiz questions as well. Yes. No, their answers will be with the packet. So there will be like 10 chapters worth of practice quiz questions, and at the very end will be answers to the quizzes that you just took, type thing. So
Next couple of days or by the end of the week?
it should be there by tomorrow. That's my goal, is to do it tomorrow.
Okay.
Next week is midterm, so sooner rather than later. I'm working on it. Of course. As long as I can't tell and no one else says anything, I'm okay with it.
Oh,
All right, so the last topic I want to cover is labor. All right, so as we go through and talked about all of this, companies making profit and all that other kind of business, they do have to hire people, right? And so the question is, how do they figure out how many people to hire? Right, because it's the standard thing that you want to work on. So if you're going to hire people, you're going to have to pay them, right? Right. So you're going to have to figure out, first of all, what price you're going to pay, and you're going to have to figure out how many of them you're going to hire, right? So it kind of sounds like you need to figure out price and quantity. How did we figure out price and quantity back in Chapter 3? Demand and supply. We said there's a certain amount of supply, there's a certain amount of demand. That sets up our equilibrium price and quantity, right? Well, labor is no different. But when we're talking about labor, what's the price of labor? Yeah, wages or salary, whatever you want to call it. And what's the quantity? Yeah, You could think of it as number of workers, or you could think of it as number of hours needed to complete work, again, assuming that people work 8 hours a day or 10 hours a day, whatever your model is for the company that you're working for/with. All right, so since we need to figure out the price and quantity, there should be a demand and supply of labor. Guess what they look like? Hey, what do you know? It does look basically like that anyways, all right? So here is our demand for labor. Here is our supply of labor. And where they hit, that's what sets up our equilibrium wage and our equilibrium number of workers that we want to hire. All right, so the question then is, how do we come about getting these two things, this demand for labor and the supply for labor? All right, let's start with the demand side, because that's kind of the cooler one, because it's very mathy, and I like the mathy stuff. So, how do we determine demand for labor? Well, I'm going to start you with the definition, and then I'll explain to you what the definition means after we go a little bit. It's defined by what we call the marginal revenue product, abbreviated MRP, so that I don't have to misspell that sequence of words again. All right, so what does that mean? In a crude way, it's kind of like that. So, trying really hard to just let that one roll right off the shoulder. So, the idea is that as you produce, right? If you think back to our example way long ago, right? We had number of workers and the total output that those workers make. All right. So at some stage, I'm just going to write up some examples here just to give us something to work with. All right. So let's suppose if we hire one worker, we produce 8 units of output. If we hire a second worker, they produce 15 units of output. If we hire a third worker, they produce 20 units of output. Hire a fourth one, they'll make 23. One, they'll make 24. Okay, so this is, and technically I made the law of diminishing returns kick in almost instantly. Now, Why? How do we figure out what the law of diminishing returns is? Think chapter 6. When you take marginals, right? So the first thing we're going to do is say, okay. So the marginals, when we're looking at a production function, is the marginal product, which is almost what we're looking for, right? Except this is marginal revenue product. We got to somehow throw revenue in between there, and we're going to figure out how to do that in a second. But what is the marginal product of our first worker? 8. What's the marginal product of our second worker? 7. Third worker? 5, 3, 1. All right. So this is basically how much does each worker add to total output, right? Now, what we care about now is not output, but revenue. How do we figure out revenue when we have output? Multiply by what? Price, exactly. If we knew how much these things were going to earn us, we could figure out what the marginal revenue product is, right? So marginal revenue product is just the marginal product, which is how much output they add, times whatever the price of the good is. All right, let's make up a price. I could be mean and say it's something like $1.34, in which case multiplication becomes a pain in the ass. But since I'm not that mean, I'll say let's suppose the price is just $10. All right. This isn't even algebra. This is arithmetic. This is like first grade arithmetic even. No. So if I wanted to calculate what the marginal revenue product is for each of our workers, 10 times 8, 80. 70, 50, 30, 10. And this is basically how much each one of my employees is earning me in revenue. And this curve, if we were to put numbers on it and graph it, suppose here's 80, here's 70, 60, here's 50, 40, here's 30, 20, 10, here's 10. And my workers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If I plot the points, right? So here's money, workers. And now it's just a matter of pointing. When I have one worker, that one worker earns me $80. Here's my first point. 2 workers, $70. There's my second point. 3 workers, they gets me a $50 bonus. 4 workers, 30. 5 workers, 10. And here you see your demand curve, okay? And that's the nice part about it, is that it will always look like this. Once you get past the law of diminishing returns, it's always this nice downward sloping demand curve. Usually it's not a straight line, but in this class it always will be. So that is actually exactly how we go about figuring out what our demand for labor is. It's strictly based on how much revenue is our person earning. So how many people would we hire? Would we hire all 5 of these people?
One.
Why not?
One guy.
Should I only hire the first one? Well, how do you know how many people you're going to hire? A bad thought, it's bisecting. But what do you have to compare these numbers to? Well, this is how much money I'm going to have. What do I have to compare it to? Cost. I have to compare it to how much it costs to hire all these people, right? Well, if the cost is, say, $30 a day, how many people do I hire? Well, 2 at least. You could get away with 4, right? I mean, that 4th worker, is it worth it to have them working?
No.
Not really. You're paying 30 and earning 30. You're kind of in the wash sort of thing there. But that 3rd worker, yeah, if you're earning $50 and it costs you $30, you do it, period, right? Remember, all we give a crap about is how much money we make, right? If, let's suppose, the workers get together and they say, wait a second, our workers get together and change their costs and demand $65 a day instead of $30 a day, what does the company do? That's right. Dumps number 3 and says, okay, we'll keep those top 2 because those top 2 are still earning me money. As long as I'm earning money, I keep going, right? If, whatever else might happen. So more unionization. And the cost equals now $90 a day. What does this company do? Yeah, they fold. They quit. They're like, okay, we're not going to make ho-hos anymore. We're not going to make ding-dongs anymore. They're done. Even those are gone.
You had to remind us of that situation. Was it about a year ago, 2 years ago now?
Yeah, something like that. It's just thinking I wanted a Twinkie.
It was a big bummer. But it was.
Eventually, they will sell each individual product to a separate supplier, and they will start up again once the,
Yeah, it's not gone forever.
I hope they sell the Twinkies recipe to somebody.
Oh, come on. The Twinkies recipe is obvious. Take cake, put,
Goo in the middle.
yeah, put
Send to space.
stuff that doesn't biodegrade in any generation that we will ever see, in the middle of it. All right, so the key then is just realizing that whatever supply dictates, if our supply is such that our costs are going to be $40 per person, that's how much we'll pay, and however many employees we have such that they will take that price, that's what we will hire. All right? So it's really driven more off of supply than it is off of demand. All right? So really the supply of labor drives the cost more than anything else. All right? So all right, tell you what, why don't we just stop right there? I don't have enough time to really do the whole thing. And if I get through all of the supply of labor, we will finish Chapter 10. Realize that after we get through the supply of labor, we are done with Chapter 10. There is some additional stuff after that in Chapter 10 that, again, I would recommend you read, but I will not ask you any questions about. Talks about redistribution of wealth and all that other cool stuff, but don't worry too much about it.